You people don't belong in this neighborhood, and you have no right to hold this wedding here." The voice of the white woman, Clarissa Vance, cut through the air like a blade. "I don't care how much foreign oil money you used to buy this house." The man she was screaming at stood perfectly still. His wedding sherwani, once a crisp cream with gold embroidery, was ripped and stained, bits of smashed baklava clinging to the fabric. Behind him, what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life lay in ruins. Overturned catering tables, shredded floral garlands, and wedding guests in modest attire huddled together in shock. But Hamid Raza's voice remained eerily calm. There was something in his eyes, a quiet confidence that suggested this woman had just made a terrible mistake. "Ma'am," he said, his tone firm but controlled, "you may want to rethink that phone call." But Clarissa was past the point of reason. Her face twisted with rage. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the FBI right now," she spat. "They'll drag you and your extremist friends out of here where you belong." She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice morphing into a shaky, theatrical desperation. "Yes, hello. There's a group of suspicious people gathering at my neighbor's house. They're shouting in a foreign language. I think I saw knives. Please send every unit you have." As sirens began to wail in the distance, Hamid's expression didn't falter. That slight, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the kind that said he knew something she didn't. She had no idea who she had just accused. She had no idea what she was really setting in motion. And what happened when those patrol cars screeched to a halt would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone watching. If you want to see how this incredible story unfolded, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. And if you believe people deserve respect no matter their faith, type respect in the comments and share where you're watching from. You'll definitely get a heartwarming reply from Living Stories. Now, to understand how a peaceful wedding celebration turned into a scene of destruction and bigotry, we need to go back to where it all began. 3 months earlier, Hamid Raza was simply a man in love, planning the perfect nikah with the woman of his dreams. At 32, Hamid had achieved something most could only imagine. He was the governor of the state. But you wouldn't know it by looking at him that sunny Saturday morning, carrying moving boxes into his new home in the upscale Rosewood Heights neighborhood. Hamid wasn't your typical politician. He didn't live in the governor's mansion, didn't keep a wall of security around him, and never flaunted his position. He was the son of a retired postman and a school cafeteria worker from the modest Maple Grove district. Everything he had achieved came through merit, scholarships, tireless work, and an unshakable belief that public office was about service, not status. His fiancée, Layla Osman, was just as remarkable. At 29, she was one of the most respected pediatric surgeons in the state. Like Hamid, she came from humble beginnings. Her father, Youssef, was a master mechanic who had sacrificed everything to put her through medical school. Layla had paid for much of her education through student loans and late-night shifts, never forgetting the sacrifices her family had made. Both Hamid and Layla preferred quiet, grounded lives far from the political spotlight. They had purchased their beautiful home in Rosewood Heights with their own hard-earned money, seeking privacy and a peaceful place to begin their married life together. Their dream was simple: an intimate nikah ceremony at their private residence, surrounded by close family and friends, away from the political circus that often swirled around Hamid's public life. But not everyone in Rosewood Heights was pleased about the new residence. Clarissa Vance lived in the sprawling Victorian next door, a house she had inherited along with a struggling construction firm still bearing her family name. At 58, Clarissa was under enormous pressure. Vance Construction was hemorrhaging money, losing contracts one after another, and she was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy unless something changed fast. Her lifeline? A crucial meeting scheduled with Governor Hamid Raza the following week. A massive state infrastructure contract worth millions was up for approval, and securing it would save her company and her reputation. The irony was sharp. Clarissa had never met the governor in person. To her, he was just a name on her calendar, her last hope for financial survival. When Clarissa first saw the young Muslim couple moving into the estate next door, something sour twisted in her gut. Here were people who clearly had money, influence, and, judging by their smiles, happiness. Everything she felt was slipping away from her own life. Her first reaction wasn't welcome or curiosity. It was resentment. Their first meeting happened on a breezy Tuesday afternoon. Clarissa had been watching from behind her lace curtains as Hamid and Layla tended to the rose bushes in their garden, their soft laughter carrying across the neatly manicured lawns. Something about that laughter grated on her. She marched over with a plate of cookies and a smile so stiff it looked painted on. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her tone sharp under the false warmth. "I'm Clarissa Vance. I've lived here for 20 years. This is a very particular kind of neighborhood. We have certain standards." Hamid, ever the diplomat, extended his hand warmly. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. I'm Hamid, and this is my fiancée, Layla. We're very excited to be part of this community." But Clarissa's eyes were already scanning them, noting the late-model European sedan in the driveway, Layla's silk hijab and tailored coat, the polished confidence in Hamid's stance. Her forced smile tightened. "And what line of work are you in?" she asked, her voice laced with unspoken assumptions. "I work in public service," Hamid replied simply. "And Layla is a pediatric surgeon." The flicker of disappointment in Clarissa's eyes was impossible to miss. These weren't transient newcomers she could dismiss as outsiders. They were educated, accomplished, and, much to her irritation, belonged here as much as anyone else. From that day on, Clarissa's attention turned into obsession. She kept mental notes of every guest, every delivery truck, every moment of activity. In her mind, their way of life wasn't just different, it was disruptive. She muttered about their foreign customs at homeowners association meetings, framing every smile or gathering in their yard as a deliberate show-off. When wedding preparations began and vendors started arriving at the Raza home, Clarissa's complaints escalated. Every catering van was suspicious. Every floral delivery was blocking the road. Laughter from their backyard became excessive noise. "They're changing the character of our neighborhood," she complained bitterly to anyone who'd listen. "Property values are going to plummet." Meanwhile, Hamid and Layla were just trying to plan their dream wedding. They wanted something intimate and beautiful, a celebration of their love surrounded by the people who mattered most. They had no idea that their quiet happiness was being twisted into arrogance in the mind of the woman next door. As Clarissa Vance's resentment festered, her business situation grew more dire. Vance Construction was teetering on collapse, and everything hinged on her upcoming meeting with the governor. "If I don't get this state contract, I lose everything," she confided to her assistant, her voice tight with panic. 20 years of keeping this company afloat, and it all comes down to one meeting with Governor Raza. She had no idea that the man she was counting on to save her livelihood was the same man she was making miserable next door. The same man whose wedding she was about to sabotage in the most spectacular way possible. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice backfire on them so perfectly it almost felt like poetic justice? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because this story is only going to get more intense. The week leading up to Hamid and Layla's wedding should have been filled with joy. Instead, it became Clarissa Vance's personal campaign of harassment. It started on Monday morning when the first delivery van pulled up with fresh jasmine garlands for the backyard. Clarissa parked her car sideways at the gated entrance to Rosewood Heights, blocking the florist's path. "Wrong neighborhood for your kind," she told the puzzled driver, eyeing the crates of flowers. "This family doesn't live here, not really." When the florist insisted he had the right address, her voice sharpened into venom. "I'm telling you, there's been a mistake. People like that don't belong here." But that was only the beginning. Throughout the week, Clarissa made it her mission to disrupt the wedding preparations. She called every vendor she could identify, spinning elaborate lies to sabotage their work. "Hello, I'm calling about the event at 512 Rosewood Heights," she'd say in a tone of false concern. "It's been canceled due to security issues. There's an investigation. It's not safe for your staff." Some vendors believed her, others didn't, but every call caused delays, confusion, and unnecessary stress for Hamid and Layla during what should have been the happiest week of their lives. The noise complaints became a daily ritual. Every time the wedding planner tested the microphone for the imam, or a sound technician played music while setting up, Clarissa was on the phone, to the city, to the HOA, to anyone who would listen. "They're disturbing the peace," she complained. This is a quiet, residential neighborhood, not a bazaar or street festival. But the worst was how she treated Hamid and Layla's family members as they arrived throughout the week. When Layla's elderly grandmother arrived, a frail woman in her 70s wearing a neatly pinned hijab, Clarissa intercepted her at the mailbox. "You people need to learn some respect," she hissed. "This isn't your neighborhood. You don't belong here." When Hamid's foster brother, Tariq, flew in from out of state, Clarissa stepped in front of his path to the front door. "Are you lost?" she asked with exaggerated sweetness. "The low-income housing is across town." Through it all, Hamid remained composed. That Thursday evening, as he and Layla sat together on their porch after yet another day of harassment, his voice was calm but steady. "We won't let her hate steal our joy," he told his fiancée. "This is our home, our wedding, our life. She doesn't get to take that away from us." But Layla was beginning to crack under the weight of it all. The constant tension, the daily confrontations, the gnawing feeling of being unwelcome in her own neighborhood, it was wearing her down. "Maybe we should have stayed in the city," she whispered, tears filling her eyes beneath her soft cream hijab. "Maybe moving here was a mistake." Hamid took her hands in his. "Layla, we have every right to be here. We've earned our place in this neighborhood, and we're not running away because one bitter woman can't stand to see us happy." As the wedding drew closer, Clarissa's behavior escalated from harassment to outright vandalism. She started with the decorations visible from the street. The wedding planners carefully arranged floral displays and silk ribbons tied to the wrought iron fence. Under the cover of darkness, Clarissa would sneak over, ripping flowers from their pots, scattering decorative stones across the sidewalk, tearing down the elegant ribbons. But even that didn't satisfy her. She began tossing garbage over their fence, rotting food scraps, crumpled takeout boxes, dirty paper bags. Anything to sully the space where the nikah ceremony would take place. The once pristine backyard, meant for a sacred celebration, became a daily cleanup project. The most heartbreaking moment came when Layla's grandfather arrived from across the country. The 80-year-old man had been saving for months to attend his granddaughter's wedding. He was walking slowly up the driveway, leaning on his cane, when Clarissa emerged like a vengeful apparition. "Go back where you came from," she screamed, her voice echoing down the street. "You and your whole family don't belong in America, let alone here." The old man was so shaken he nearly lost his balance. Hamid's foster brother, Tariq, had to steady him and guide him inside while Layla collapsed into Hamid's arms, sobbing. Their wedding planner, Esperanza Montclair, had been documenting everything. She had coordinated weddings for 2 decades and had never witnessed behavior like this. "Governor," she said, not realizing at first she was speaking to the state's highest elected official. "This woman is completely out of control. We need to call the police." But Hamid shook his head. "Let's not escalate this. We're having our wedding here no matter what she does." The other neighbors were caught in an uncomfortable silence. Some were horrified by Clarissa's actions, but afraid to speak up. Others offered quiet words of support to Hamid and Layla in private, but avoided confronting Clarissa publicly. And a few, Hamid suspected, quietly agreed with her. That Friday night, alone in his study, Hamid reflected on the week's events. As governor, he had sworn to serve all the people of his state. "Even people like her," he said softly to himself. "But I never imagined that hatred could feel this personal." Saturday morning dawned clear and golden. Despite everything Clarissa had done, Hamid and Layla were determined to have their perfect wedding day. But Clarissa had other plans. At 6 a.m., Clarissa Vance began her final assault. She marched across to the Raza property and tore into every wedding decoration she could reach. Flower arrangements were ripped apart and scattered across the dew-soaked lawn. Elegant silk ribbons were yanked from their posts and tossed into the mud. Hand-painted signs welcoming guests to the nikah were snapped in half and left in the dirt. When Esperanza arrived at 7 o'clock for final preparations, she found Clarissa still in the act of destruction. "Ma'am, you need to stop this immediately," the wedding planner said firmly. "This is private property, and you are committing vandalism." Clarissa whirled around, eyes wild with rage. "This is my neighborhood. I'm not going to let these people turn it into some foreign parade ground." As the morning progressed and guests began to arrive, Clarissa stationed herself at her front window like a sniper. She watched every car, noting every unfamiliar face, her glare hardening when she saw the mix. Men in suits, women in flowing dresses and hijabs, families of all backgrounds arriving to celebrate. The diversity seemed to fuel her fury. The ceremony began at 2 o'clock in the Raza's backyard. It was intimate and beautiful. Hamid and Layla exchanging vows under a floral arch that had somehow survived Clarissa's morning rampage. But the peace didn't last. From her yard, Clarissa began screaming at the top of her lungs, determined to disrupt the sacred moment. "This is a respectable neighborhood," she shrieked. "Take your noise and your mosque crowd somewhere else." Guests tried to ignore her, but her voice carried across the hedges, cutting through the imam's blessing and drowning the soft murmur of prayers. Then came the breaking point. Clarissa climbed over the fence separating their properties and stormed into the Raza's backyard in the middle of the reception. Guests recoiled in shock as she launched her attack. She overturned the tables, sending carefully plated dishes crashing to the ground. She grabbed the 3-tier wedding cake, the one Layla had dreamed of since she was a teenager, and smashed it onto the patio tiles. But the worst was her mouth. The Islamophobic slurs poured out, each more venomous than the last. Several guests covered their children's ears, trying to shield them from the ugliness. "You people don't belong here," she screamed, her face twisted with hatred. "I don't care how much foreign money you use to buy this house. You'll never be part of this country." Tariq, Hamid's foster brother, tried to restrain her, but Clarissa fought like a cornered animal, clawing, spitting, and continuing her tirade. And that was when she made the phone call that would change everything. Standing in the middle of the wreckage she had caused, surrounded by shaken guests and a devastated bride and groom, Clarissa Vance pulled out her phone and dialed 911. This was the moment that brought us back to where it all started. The moment her hatred was about to backfire in the most spectacular way. Clarissa Vance stood in the middle of the wreckage she had caused, phone pressed to her ear, her voice dripping with false panic as she spun her most dangerous lies to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, hello, there's a radical group gathering at my neighbor's house," she shrieked, her tone theatrical and desperate. "They're shouting in Arabic, 'I saw weapons,' and they threatened to kill me. Send every unit you have." The dispatcher's voice was calm but focused. "Ma'am, can you describe the weapons you saw?" Without missing a beat, Clarissa escalated her lies into dangerous absurdity. Guns, knives, machetes, they said they were going to burn down the whole neighborhood and drive every American out. Her voice trembled on cue. "Please hurry. I'm in fear for my life. Can you imagine the evil it takes to look at a wedding? Elderly grandparents in traditional attire, children in their best clothes, a bride in her flowing gown, and describe it as a terrorist gathering?" This woman had completely severed herself from reality, consumed by a hatred so deep it had rotted her soul. While her delusional call unfolded, Hamid was doing everything he could to keep his shaken guests safe. Children cried into their parents' shoulders. Elderly relatives trembled, unable to comprehend how a sacred day had descended into this nightmare. "Everyone, please stay calm," Hamid said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Let's move the children inside where they'll be safe. This will be over soon." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Police officers were about to arrive expecting to find dangerous extremists. And in America, when officers believe they're walking into a terrorism threat, situations can spiral tragically fast. Layla knelt beside the ruins of their wedding cake, a 3-tier masterpiece, days in the making, reduced to smeared frosting and crumbs. Tears streamed down her face as she held a small piece meant to be saved for their first anniversary. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, yet this hateful woman had turned it into something out of a nightmare. Her beautiful gown, which she had spent months saving for, was now stained with food and dirt. The reception she had carefully planned was in ruins. The memories she was meant to treasure forever had been poisoned with malice. Her father, Yusuf Osman, stood nearby, his hands trembling with a rage he had never felt before. This gentle man, who had worked double shifts for years to put his daughter through medical school, who had never raised his voice in anger, now looked utterly shaken. 30 years I've lived in this country," he said, his voice breaking. 30 years, and I have never seen such pure evil in a person. What kind of human being destroys a wedding? What kind of monster screams at children and grandparents? Tariq, Hamid's foster brother, tried to comfort the younger guests while recording everything on his phone. He had seen prejudice before, but never anything this brazen, this venomous. "Hamid," he whispered, glancing toward the street. "Maybe we should all leave before the police get here. You know how this could go." But Hamid shook his head. "We're not running from our own home, and we're not hiding from who we are." The sirens were getting louder now, their wailing turning the street into a tense, surreal stage. Multiple units were on the way. Clarissa's lies about weapons and radical extremists had triggered a major police response. Hamid knew that in minutes, officers would arrive expecting to find a dangerous, high-risk situation, not the remains of a destroyed wedding and a neighborhood fractured by one woman's hatred. Esperanza, the wedding planner, was frantically trying to salvage what she could, scooping ruined flowers into bins and righting overturned chairs. But it was hopeless. In her 20 years of planning ceremonies, she had never witnessed anything like this. Such calculated cruelty, such unprovoked malice. Neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sirens and the shouting. Some looked genuinely shocked at what they were seeing. Others seemed embarrassed, as if Clarissa's behavior cast a shadow over the whole street. And a few, the ones who exchanged smirks and murmured among themselves, looked quietly satisfied. That was perhaps the most unsettling sight of all. The sirens grew deafening as the tension peaked. Everyone present could feel they were standing in a moment that would be remembered, for better or worse. Whatever happened next would decide not just the fate of Hamid and Layla's ruined wedding, but the future of how this community saw itself. 2 squad cars screeched into Rosewood Heights, their lights flashing red and blue against the polished facades of the Victorian homes. A 3rd car followed close behind, then a 4th. Clarissa's fabricated story about armed radicals had triggered the kind of overwhelming response she wanted. Officers prepared for a high-threat takedown. They stepped out with the urgency of people expecting a fight. Their briefings had warned of possible weapons, extremist threats, and violence spilling into the neighborhood. Hands rested on holstered sidearms as they approached, scanning for danger. Instead, they found something that didn't match the call at all. Officer Reginald Thorne, a 20-year veteran who had seen every variety of crime scene, froze for a moment as he took it all in. Elegant, if disheveled, wedding decorations were scattered across the lawn. Guests in formal attire huddled together, some comforting crying children. Elderly relatives in embroidered sherwanis and pressed suits stood looking bewildered. Overturned catering tables lay where they had fallen, their dishes ruined. It looked more like the aftermath of a storm hitting a celebration than any kind of criminal gathering. The disconnect was so sharp that for a brief second, Officer Thorne wondered if they had the wrong address. Then Clarissa came running toward him like an actress in a bad drama, arms outstretched, her face twisted into a mask of exaggerated terror. "Thank God you're here," she cried. "I called as soon as I could. They've been threatening me for hours. I thought they were going to kill me." The other officers fanned out, scanning the property as protocol demanded, but the confusion on their faces was obvious. These were not terrorists. These were families. Children in dress shoes clutching their mothers' skirts. Grandparents leaning on canes. Officer Thorne looked from Clarissa to the wedding guests, trying to piece it together. Where were the weapons? Where was the threat? Where was the violence the dispatcher had warned them about? "Ma'am," he said evenly, though his tone carried an edge of skepticism, "can you calm down and tell me exactly what's going on here?" Clarissa jabbed her finger toward the wedding guests, her hand trembling with rage and adrenaline. Her performance was so exaggerated it could have been pulled straight from a bad soap opera. Over the top, hysterical, desperate. "Arrest all of them," she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "They're radicals. They threatened to kill me. They said they were going to burn down the entire neighborhood. They're dangerous. Arrest them all." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. What they saw didn't match a word of her accusations. They saw traumatized wedding guests, not militants. They saw children clinging to their parents, not aggressors. They saw elderly grandparents in sherwanis and modest dresses, not armed criminals. They saw the shattered remains of what had clearly been a formal, elegant celebration. One of the younger officers leaned toward his partner and whispered, "Does this look like a terrorist cell to you?" But Clarissa wasn't finished. Her hysteria escalated with each word, her voice climbing higher and more shrill. "They don't belong here. This is a respectable neighborhood. They're probably all criminals. Check them for weapons, check them for explosives." And then, through all the noise, through all the chaos and Clarissa's theatrical screaming, Hamid Raza stepped forward. Despite his torn sherwani, despite the ruined wedding, despite the Islamophobic slurs and the venom hurled at him and his family, he approached the officers with a calm, deliberate dignity that seemed almost unreal. Here was a man whose wedding day had been reduced to rubble by hate, who had heard his bride insulted, seen his elderly relatives humiliated, and his guests terrorized. And yet, he moved with the composed authority of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. "Officers," he began, his voice steady and measured, the same voice that had carried him through countless tense political moments. "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here." Officer Reginald Thorne turned toward him, taking in the tall, composed man standing in the wreckage. Something about him stirred recognition. The posture, the voice, the calm that felt like it had been practiced under far greater pressure than this. This wasn't just any wedding guest. This was someone important. But who? Thorne studied Hamid for what felt like an eternity, the chaos around them fading into background noise. And then, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, the realization began to form. Officer Thorne had been in law enforcement for 20 years, and his instincts for reading people were razor sharp. This man wasn't just anyone. There was something about him, the calm, the authority in his tone, the way everyone seemed to orient toward him, that screamed leadership. And then, like a lightning bolt, recognition struck. "Wait," he said slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Governor Raza." Those two words hit the backyard like an explosion. Every guest, every officer, every neighbor froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The implications were so massive, so shattering, that for a long moment no one could speak, no one could breathe. Thorne's hand trembled as he reached for his radio. His voice carried urgency, embarrassment, and dawning horror. "Dispatch, this is Officer Thorne. I need immediate verification of the current location and status of Governor Hamid Raza. This is urgent. Repeat, urgent." The radio crackled back with confusion. "Officer Thorne, the governor has no scheduled public events today. He's not under protection detail. Why do you ask?" Thorne's voice cracked slightly as he answered. "Because I'm looking right at him, and we just responded to a call claiming he was the leader of an armed extremist group." The silence on the radio was suffocating. Even the dispatchers seemed to grasp the enormity of what had just been said. Around the yard, other officers were having their own delayed moments of realization. They had seen him on TV, in press conferences, on campaign posters. But to see him here, in a torn sherwani dusted with frosting, surrounded by ruined decorations, was so surreal that their minds had trouble catching up. Clarissa Vance, however, was lost in confusion. She looked from the officers to Hamid, her face tightening into a mask of panic. The officers had stopped paying her any attention, and she couldn't understand why. "Governor," she stammered. "What governor? Why aren't you arresting them?" Murmurs began to ripple through the wedding guests. People were realizing, piece by piece, that the man whose wedding had just been torn apart wasn't just a groom. He was the most powerful elected official in the state. And then, like an ugly puzzle snapping together, recognition finally dawned on Clarissa's face. Her eyes went wide with a fear that hollowed her out from the inside. "Raza," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Governor Raza, my meeting Monday morning." The color didn't just drain from her face. It disappeared completely, leaving her looking like a living ghost. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and she staggered backward as if she'd been physically struck. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. You're the governor. The man I'm supposed to, the contract, the meeting." Hamid looked at her with the same calm dignity he had maintained through every insult, every slur, every act of vandalism. Even now, after she had tried to destroy his wedding and his reputation, he didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply stood there, composed, the embodiment of the respect she had denied him from the start. Hamid showed no satisfaction at her growing horror. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but crystal clear. "I'm the man you're supposed to meet Monday morning, Miss Vance. The man whose approval you need for your construction contract." The man you've been calling a terrorist for the past week. Clarissa's mental unraveling began in that instant. The magnitude of what she had done slammed into her like an avalanche. She had just destroyed the wedding of the one person who could save her failing business. She had screamed Islamophobic slurs at the governor of her state. She had filed a false police report accusing him of leading an armed extremist group. She had smashed his wedding cake with her own hands while shouting that he didn't belong in America. No, 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 she moaned, clutching her head as the reality crashed over her. This can't be happening. This can't be real. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But she had known. Somewhere deep down, some part of her had always known that her hatred was wrong, that her actions were rooted in malice. She had chosen to let that hatred consume her anyway, and now she was standing in the wreckage of her own making. Officer Thorne was getting updates through his radio, and his face paled with each word. He now understood that his department had just responded to a false report accusing the state's governor of being a terrorist leader. The political implications were staggering. The media fallout would be catastrophic. "Ma'am," he said to Clarissa, his voice professional and cold now, "I'm going to need you to step over here. We need to discuss the details of your 911 call." But Clarissa was barely hearing him. She was staring at Hamid as if seeing him for the first time, her voice shaking. "The contract. Vance Construction. 20 years. Everything I worked for." Everyone watching knew the truth. Her hatred had destroyed far more than a wedding. It had obliterated her business, her reputation, and quite possibly her freedom. All because she couldn't stand to see a Muslim couple succeed in what she considered her neighborhood. The moment she realized exactly who she had been attacking, something inside her snapped. The arrogant, entitled woman who had spent weeks terrorizing her neighbors now became a desperate, pleading figure. "Governor Raza, please," she cried, falling to her knees in the middle of the wreckage. "I didn't know. I had no idea it was you. Please, you have to understand. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." But Hamid looked down at her, his face calm, his voice steady, and absolutely devastating. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Miss Vance," he said quietly. "You knew you were attacking a Muslim family. You knew you were using slurs. You knew you were filing a false police report. The only thing you didn't know was that it would have consequences for you." Officer Thorne was now methodically documenting everything: the destroyed wedding cake, the overturned tables, the shredded decorations. He photographed, took notes, treated it as the crime scene it was. Other officers were interviewing traumatized guests. Elderly relatives described being threatened with vile Islamophobic insults. The wedding planner produced photos of vandalized decorations taken earlier in the week. Neighbors, some hesitant, admitted they had witnessed Clarissa's harassment but had been too afraid to step in. The evidence piled up quickly: vandalism, criminal harassment, filing a false police report, and because of the religious targeting, hate crime enhancements that made the charges even more serious. "Ma'am," Officer Thorne said, his tone firm and final, "you're under arrest for filing a false police report, criminal harassment, vandalism, and destruction of property. Due to the religiously motivated nature of your actions, these will be prosecuted as hate crimes." Clarissa's frantic attempts to backpedal fell on deaf ears. She tried every excuse she could muster. "I was protecting the neighborhood, but no one was listening anymore. I thought they were criminals. I was scared. I'm not Islamophobic. Some of my best friends are Muslim. I mean, I would never." But her words rang hollow. Too many people had heard her Islamophobic tirades. Too many witnesses had seen her tear apart the wedding while shouting that people like them didn't belong in her neighborhood. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire street. Clarissa Vance, who had started the day believing she was the queen of Rosewood Heights, was now being arrested in front of everyone she had spent years trying to impress. Her self-made world of entitlement and superiority was crumbling in real time. The woman who had built her entire identity on being above others, on belonging to an exclusive community, was being led away in handcuffs like any common criminal. But the humiliation was only beginning. Word spread like wildfire. In the age of social media, it took less than an hour for the story to explode across the internet. A guest had been live streaming parts of the wedding, and the footage of Clarissa's Islamophobic rampage, followed by her arrest, was going viral by the minute. The first news van arrived just as she was being loaded into the police car. Then another. Then another. By evening, Rosewood Heights looked like the scene of a breaking national news story. Satellite trucks parked up and down the street, reporters doing live broadcasts in front of the Raza home. The headlines were brutal. Islamophobic neighbor destroys governor's wedding. Hate has consequences. Construction CEO arrested at wedding. When prejudice meets power. Vance Construction's reputation was obliterated overnight. Their website crashed under the surge of people reading about Clarissa's arrest. Their social media accounts were flooded with thousands of furious comments. The company's already fragile financials went into a tailspin. By Monday morning, every major contractor in the state was publicly cutting ties with Vance Construction. The business that had been hanging by a thread now faced total collapse. Clarissa's business partners were fleeing. Her board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss removing her entirely, and clients canceled contracts en masse. Suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding debts. The woman who had been counting on a state contract to save her company had instead ensured she'd never see a government contract again. Not just in her state, but anywhere. Her name was now nationally synonymous with religious bigotry and hate crimes. Hamid Raza, meanwhile, conducted himself with the same unshakable dignity he had shown from the start. Standing before the press outside his damaged home, still wearing his torn sherwani, he gave a statement that was both gracious and firm. "Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my wife's and my life," he said, his voice steady despite everything. Instead, it became a reminder that prejudice still exists in our communities. But it also became a reminder that actions have consequences, and that love and dignity will always triumph over hatred. He didn't gloat. He didn't attack Clarissa personally. He simply spoke the truth, with the kind of moral authority that reminded everyone watching exactly why he had been elected to lead their state. When reporters asked if he would press charges, Hamid's answer was measured. "Justice will take its course. But I hope this serves as a reminder that we must all examine our own hearts and choose to build bridges instead of walls." That evening, Clarissa Vance's mugshot was released. The transformation was staggering. The immaculately dressed, self-assured woman who had spent the morning spewing hate and destroying her neighbor's wedding now looked haggard, defeated, and utterly broken. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes hollow, the look of someone who had lost everything. The fall from grace was complete. In less than 12 hours, Clarissa had gone from being a business owner preparing for the most important meeting of her career to being a nationally recognized symbol of religious bigotry, facing multiple felony charges, and the total destruction of everything she had worked to build. Her hatred hadn't just ruined a wedding. It had obliterated her business, her reputation, and her freedom. And the most tragic part? It was all completely, utterly preventable. If she had chosen to welcome her new neighbors instead of targeting them, if she had chosen kindness over hate, if she had seen Hamid and Layla as human beings instead of threats to her imagined sense of superiority, none of this would have happened. Instead, she had chosen hatred. And hatred always destroys the person who clings to it more than anyone else. What would you have done to Clarissa if you were in Governor Raza's position? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to find out what happened next. 3 weeks after that devastating wedding day, Clarissa Vance stood in a courtroom facing the very real possibility of years in prison. The charges were serious: filing a false police report, criminal harassment, vandalism, destruction of property, and hate crimes. Her lawyer warned her she could be looking at 5 to 7 years behind bars. The media coverage had been relentless. Her company, Vance Construction, had lost every contract, every client, and every shred of credibility it had taken decades to build. The woman who had once strutted through her neighborhood with an air of superiority now couldn't step into a grocery store without being recognized and confronted by angry strangers. And then something extraordinary happened. Governor Hamid Raza walked into that courtroom and did something no one expected. Instead of pushing for the maximum sentence for the woman who had tried to destroy his wedding and terrorize his family, he addressed the judge with a request that left the room stunned. "Your Honor," Hamid began, his voice carrying the same dignity that had defined him through the entire ordeal, I want to request that Ms. Vance's charges be reduced to misdemeanors, with the condition that she proves her change through actions, not just words. The packed courtroom erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Here was a man who had every reason to demand the harshest punishment, every justification to see his attacker face the full force of the law. Instead, Governor Hamid Raza was offering her a path to redemption. Ms. Vance's contract with the state will be suspended indefinitely, pending genuine proof of transformation, Hamid continued. She must complete 6 months of community service, specifically in the neighborhoods and communities she targeted with her hatred. She must undergo extensive sensitivity training and education on the impact of religious prejudice. And most importantly, she must show, through her actions, that she has truly changed. Clarissa sat in the defendant's chair, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the same man she had called a terrorist, the man whose wedding she had destroyed, whose family she had terrified with Islamophobic slurs, now offer her a second chance she knew she didn't deserve. "I've been bitter and hateful for so long," she whispered to her lawyer, her voice breaking. "I don't even know who I am without the anger. I don't know if I can change." Judge Patricia Williams studied both Hamid and Clarissa for a long moment before speaking. "Ms. Vance, you are receiving a gift of grace that few people ever get. Governor Raza could have demanded the maximum sentence, and frankly, you would have deserved it. Instead, he is offering you a chance to prove that redemption is possible. Don't waste it." The first day of community service was the hardest of Clarissa's life. She stood outside the Muhammad Ali Community Center in the heart of the city's predominantly Muslim quarter, clutching her court papers and fighting the urge to turn around and leave. Inside, she found something that shattered every stereotype she had ever clung to. The center was clean, well-organized, and full of families working together to improve their neighborhood. These weren't the outsiders she had ranted about. These were people building better lives for themselves and their children. The center's director, Dr. Samira Qureshi, had been hesitant to accept Clarissa's placement. "I'm giving you one chance," she said that first day. "But if you show even a hint of the attitude you displayed at that wedding, you're gone." Those first weeks were brutal. Clarissa was assigned to mop floors, clean bathrooms, and do basic maintenance. Some community members recognized her and openly showed their hostility. But Clarissa kept showing up. Day after day, week after week, she cleaned, served, and listened. Gradually, she began to hear the stories of the people around her. Farid, a retired taxi driver struggling after a stroke. Amina, a single mother working double shifts to put her daughter through school. Bilal, a teenager trying to stay out of trouble while his father worked overseas. These weren't the caricatures she had carried in her mind. They were complex human beings with dreams, fears, and hopes just like anyone else. 3 months into her service, Dr. Qureshi approached her with an unexpected offer. "We're starting a small business mentorship program. We have young entrepreneurs who need guidance. You've got 30 years of business experience. Will you help?" Her first mentee was Yusuf Malik, a 25-year-old who wanted to start a landscaping business. At their first meeting, Yusuf was clearly uncomfortable. He knew exactly who Clarissa was and what she had done, but he needed the help badly enough to take the risk. Clarissa was surprised by how determined he was. She taught him how to bid on contracts, manage cash flow, and build supplier relationships. She even used her industry contacts to help him land his first clients. Her second mentee was Fatima Rahman, a talented cook with dreams of launching a catering service. Clarissa worked with her for months, helping her write a business plan, find investors, and navigate licensing. The irony was not lost on anyone. The woman who had once screamed that people like them didn't belong in her neighborhood was now working tirelessly to help them succeed. But the real turning point came with her third mentee, Layla Khan, a 19-year-old single mother who wanted to start a daycare center. "Why should I trust you?" Layla asked bluntly at their first meeting. "You called people like me dangerous. Now you want to help me." Clarissa could have made excuses. Instead, she told the truth. "You're right to doubt me. I was a hateful, prejudiced woman who spent years looking down on people like you. But I'm not asking you to trust who I was. I'm asking you to see who I'm trying to become." Working with Layla became the most meaningful experience of Clarissa's life. Together, they created the business plan for Little Dreamers Daycare, navigated the licensing maze, and secured funding through grants and microloans. 6 months after her sentencing, Clarissa stood once again before Judge Williams for her review hearing. The transformation was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. Yusuf spoke about how she had helped him turn his landscaping dream into a thriving business that now employed 5 people. Fatima described how Clarissa's mentorship had turned her catering ambitions into a bustling kitchen and steady clientele. But it was Layla's testimony that brought tears to the judge's eyes. "Ms. Vance didn't just help me start a daycare," she said, holding back emotion. "She helped me believe I deserved to succeed. And she proved to me that people really can change if they're willing to do the work." Governor Hamid Raza had quietly attended the hearing. When asked if he believed Clarissa had met the conditions of her sentence, his answer was immediate. "Ms. Vance has proven through her actions that redemption is real. She has earned a second chance." Judge Williams reduced Clarissa's remaining charges and restored Vance Construction's eligibility for state contracts, starting with a modest project to build a new wing for the Muhammad Ali Community Center. 1 year to the day after the destroyed wedding, Hamid and Layla Raza celebrated their first anniversary with a neighborhood barbecue. The guest list included neighbors of all backgrounds, colleagues, and friends they had made through their community work. And there, in a simple sundress, helping serve food, was Clarissa Vance, the same woman who had once tried to destroy their wedding, now welcomed as a neighbor and friend. Yusuf was there with his family, showing off photos of his latest projects. Fatima had catered part of the event. Layla brought her baby daughter, whom she had named Hope. "You know," Layla said to her husband as they watched their former tormentor kneel to help a young boy in a kufi reach the dessert table, "maybe this is what real victory looks like. Not destroying your enemies, but helping them become better people." Hamid nodded, slipping an arm around his wife. "Hate destroys everything it touches," he said. "But love has the power to transform even the most broken people into something beautiful." As the evening wound down, Clarissa approached them. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for today, but for showing me what grace looks like. You could have destroyed me, and you would have been justified. Instead, you gave me the chance to save myself." Hamid smiled. "We didn't save you, Clarissa. You did the work. You made the choice to change. But you showed me it was possible," she replied. "You believed I could be better when I didn't even believe it myself." The story of Clarissa Vance's transformation became a symbol of hope in communities struggling with religious prejudice and division. It proved that redemption is possible, but only when someone is willing to do the hard, uncomfortable work of real change. It showed that love really can conquer hate, but only when we're brave enough to choose love, even when hatred feels easier. And it reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful answer to prejudice isn't punishment or revenge, but the radical grace that offers someone the chance to become better than they ever imagined. In the end, what began as a story of Islamophobia and destruction became a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness, redemption, and the belief that no one is beyond hope. The wedding once shattered by hate had ultimately built something far greater. A community where former enemies could become friends, where forgiveness could triumph over resentment, where love could heal even the deepest wounds. That's the kind of love that changes the world, one heart at a time.